This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
You're listening to the longest running weekly episodic comic book podcast in all Place to Be Nation.
Broadcasting from the state-of-the-art L-shaped studios at beautiful and serene Ho-Ho-Loon Plaza in Vancouver, British Columbia. Greg Phillips and Nick Duke are the Hard-Traveling Fanboys.
Place to Be Nation, welcome to yet another edition of the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. I am Greg Phillips. With me, as always, is the lovely Nick Duke, and we are here to bring you Off the Page. That's right, Off the Page. And what we do here on Off the Page is we take a look at a piece of comic book media that is not a comic book, and we examine it. Sometimes this will be a movie, sometimes a TV show, sometimes a game, sometimes something off the wall. But this time around, it is a movie. We are coming to you on tape delay. The video machines are rolling. They're not going to be aired anywhere. But the audio is rolling, and they're being aired right now. We are in the L-shaped studio in Ho-Ho-Loon Plaza in beautiful and serene Vancouver, BC. And we are, of course, the longest-running
weekly episodic comic book podcast in all Place to Be Nation. That's how you do that.
Yes. You know. And we are here today to take a look at a movie that, quite frankly, we've been dreading doing for quite some time now, but we decided to soldier on because we've found over the years when it comes to Off the Page, often our most popular episodes have been the ones in which we suffer the most. Mm-hmm. So, Nick, tell people about what we're here to talk about today.
Well, we're not here to talk about a long book hunt concerning The Devil in Cell Block D, which is what we promised you when last we were here.
Breaking promises 2016.
Mistakenly planned to do a long book hunt the same weekend that we were, watching a lot of Japanese professional wrestling. So we quickly realized there was little time for reading, but we were able to sneak in a movie watch, so we're just going to delay our long book hunt on Devil in Cell Block D to the end of this month. So if that's what you're for, stick around for this unique episode that's sure to follow, because we are here to bring you the long-promised and long-dreaded for your glorious co-hosts off-the-page review of a film known as The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And there's a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous to cover as it relates to this film and our, we'll get all that, where we were with it coming into it. Greg and I kind of came into that film in the summer of 2014 in different places as it related to the second attempt by Sony at a Spider-Man big screen franchise. We'll get to that. But joining us, because we were not going to suffer alone, he is part of the Sarcastic Four over at the Marvel Age podcast, and he is the host of the Sellers Points podcast, Mr. Russell Sellers. How are you, sir?
You mean this isn't the Suicide Squad review?
No.
What have I signed up for?
This is this is worse than the Suicide Squad review.
I was prepared, but
only because, Greg. If only because at least Suicide Squad has Margot Robbie.
That's true. That's a great. Always a great point.
Not that Emma Stone ain't hot, but Emma Stone also ain't walking around scantily clad throughout the entire movie. So
that would have improved this one considerably.
It would have. That's true.
Yes. Russell, thank you for joining us. Russell, to give a little inside baseball here to the folks at home, because we know that's what they love.
Sure.
Russell and our friend Garner actually joined us this past weekend for our Japanese wrestling excursion, and we managed to all watch this film together. So it was a shared experience, and I can't say it was a positive experience for anyone.
No, it was such a bad experience that I had to pull a move that I rarely pull, a move known only as the David Sunday, in which I had to split my viewing of this film up into 2 different sittings because I just couldn't take it.
Yes, it was late at night, and I could feel your frustration building and growing as the film progressed.
This is the first time I think it's the first time I've sat down and watched the entire thing since the theater. I have seen like I think I saw about 30 minutes of it a few months ago on TV that made me want to do it as an off the page. But this is the first time I've sat down and watched the whole thing from beginning to end. And man, I had forgotten what I was getting into. And not just in terms of how bad it is at times, because it absolutely is, but as we'll discuss, it would be one thing if it were so bad the entire time that I could have fun with it, but it will be bad, and then it will give me moments that I genuinely like, and then it just winds up pissing me off because of how frustrating it is. It's very Green Lantern in that regard, is the best comparison I can draw.
At any point, did you consider just cutting off the electricity? You lied to me. Electricity.
For those who don't know, that's actually part of the soundtrack.
I believe that is the official theme song, Electro.
It is indeed. They took little bits of his dialogue and electronica techno remixed it and looped it behind him during his first fight with Spider-Man. So yeah, that's the kind of movie you're dealing with.
You have to really get across that he is indeed filled with electricity by telling you that over and over again.
Not only that, but how he gets his powers is certainly a unique take. But then again,
Yes.
How he gets his powers in the comics is also would have been a unique take.
So let's get right into this one here. I like to give a little bit of a preamble here before we get to the actual motion picture. Now, full disclosure.
Yeah, we should mention, by the way,
Yeah.
typically when we do these off-the-page episodes, we will cue the movie up and watch alongside it and provide not necessarily a commentary, but we will use the movie to provide talking points and jog our memories about things we may be forgetting. We are not doing this week because I refuse to do it. So there you go.
Good call.
Yes. So anyone wanting to watch along with us, feel free to put the movie on at your own risk, but we're not going to do it. We're just going to wing this one and go off of our scarred memories. So leading into this film came out in 2014, and it came out on the heels of, I believe, 2 years earlier, was it, Nick? That
2012, July of 2012, yes.
The Amazing Spider-Man 1 came out. This was a reboot from Sony of the Spider-Man franchise after the creative disappointment of Spider-Man 3, despite its financial success. They couldn't come to terms with Sam Raimi to continue that franchise, so they decided to reboot. Andrew Garfield comes in as Spider-Man. Mark Webb comes in as the director. They decide to use Gwen Stacy as the love interest this time around, as opposed to Mary Jane Watson, who we talked about in our Spider-Man 2 review in the archives. So they start this out with Amazing Spider-Man in 2012, a movie that was fairly well received. And Nick, I know it's one that you are particularly fond of. So tell people about your experience with Amazing Spider-Man and how that influenced your excitement level for Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, Amazing Spider-Man is a movie that I'm actually a huge fan of. If you look at it from an objective standpoint, I can't make a convincing argument that it's necessarily better made than something like Spider-Man 2 from Sam Raimi. But I can say that pretty much starting with Spider-Man back in 2002 and moving through each iteration of the character, not necessarily each film, but each of the 3 takes on the character we've gotten to this point, Sony and now Marvel have been kind of moving the character on the big screen closer and closer to my preferred version. As people who listen to this podcast, who have read any of our old columns know, I got into comics through a book called Ultimate Spider-Man, which reimagined the origin of Peter Parker as if it were taking place in the 2000s and cast him as a 15 to 16-year-old kid. And so I have always been a bigger fan of young Spider-Man, much like Tom Holland is currently in the MCU. And so, while I thoroughly enjoyed the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, they were not necessarily my favorite version of the character. And so, when we got a movie that was promised in Amazing Spider-Man to feature a high school age Peter Parker, the book of the film, and it did for the entirety of the first film, I was excited because it felt like they were getting closer. Then you throw in The costume design that was leaked not leaked, but released during the build up as part of the marketing for Amazing Spider-Man, which hewed very closely to the Mark Bagley Ultimate Spider-Man take on the costume. My expectations were very high coming into that film, and so I saw it, and entire sequences were lifted directly from that first trade of Ultimate Spider-Man, and it just endeared that movie to me in such a way. Greg, I know at one point when you and I saw Man of Steel the first time together, you said after the film you felt like that was the closest they would ever get to the John Byrne Superman, and so it had this deep emotional connection to you. And so that's kind of the same parallel. It's not necessarily better made than any of the Spider-Man movies that came before it. And they would definitely get it even closer to what my preferred take on the character is with Spider-Man Homecoming. But at the time, Amazing Spider-Man hit for me in a big, big way, and I wound up becoming probably one of that movie's staunchest defenders. And so, once the foundation was set with Amazing Spider-Man, I was really, really excited about Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then the bell rang, so to speak.
Then the bell rang indeed. Now, I'll give my thoughts in a moment, but Russell, I want to give you a chance here. You are the biggest Spider-Man fan that I know. Yep. He is your favorite character, and I know you have a particular fondness, as do I, for Spider-Man 2. So, what was your reaction to Amazing Spider-Man 1, and what was your relative excitement level heading into Amazing Spider-Man 2?
I'm going to go ahead and hot take it. The first Amazing Spider-Man is a better Spider-Man movie than Sam Raimi's first film. I'm also going to say that it's easily better than Spider-Man 3, but that's a low bar to set. So that's where I was on Amazing Spider-Man. Coming into it, I was trepidatious because it was a reboot that came about 6 years after the previous Spider-Man franchise came to an unfortunate end. And I was really big on Tobey Maguire, really liked his take on Spider-Man, loved what Raimi had done. Even though it was much more that 70s style Spider-Man.
Yes, the Jerry Conway.
Yeah, it was very in that vein of the character. So I was high on it because that was the version of the character that I originally knew. Mm-hmm. And coming into Amazing Spider-Man, I knew that it was taking a little bit more, as Nick said, of the Ultimate Spider-Man approach. And I wasn't as familiar with that version of the character, though I had read some of it and had enjoyed what I had seen. So I was very open to it. I thought Andrew Garfield was a talented actor, and seeing trailers and stuff, it kind of made me excited. And we were getting one of my favorite Spider-Man villains in the Lizard. And when I saw the film, I was pretty high on it. I don't think I was as high on it as Nick is, because there's still some really odd scenes in that first movie. The one that really just keeps sticking in my craw is Peter has kind of put it all together about Kurt Connors and his lizard connection, and he goes to the lab, or like Kurt Connors' office, and there's this mutated lizard rat hybrid on the floor, and it just turns around and hisses at him. And we act like that's not even a thing later. We act like he didn't see that, like it wasn't even, didn't even register. And that should have been like the most terrifying thing that he's ever seen. But in any case, Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield had just fire chemistry together. I mean, probably helps that they were a real life couple, but they had the chemistry that I felt like Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst kind of struggled to get at times. And it flowed so naturally between them that even if some of the action bits in Amazing Spider-Man were a little on the CG, as most Spider-Man movies had been to that point, it didn't really matter because all of the bits in between, all the character beats and everything, super strong. Just absolutely what I wanted out of a new Spider-Man film. And that's why I was pretty hyped for Amazing Spider-Man 2, because I felt like this version of the franchise had set us on such strong footing at the start that we were in a really good place for where a sequel could go. And then, of course, as Nick correctly pointed out, the bell rang and, welp.
Yeah. And I think for where I was at heading into it, I was definitely the lowest on Amazing Spider-Man of the three of us. I thought it was okay, and there were things that I liked about it. But as very similarly, my preferred take on Spider-Man has always been the older Spider-Man, not old man Spider-Man, but college age and beyond Spider-Man. I was never really as interested in the high school shenanigans and all that stuff. And so the Raimi movies were more of what I looked for. Maybe at times could have had a little bit more humor. And so I was excited about that in Amazing Spider-Man. And I think that was a movie where the intent, I think, was good in many ways, but I didn't think that it quite succeeded in what it was trying to do. But certainly it was a solid movie. And so I was not as pumped heading into Amazing 2 as many people were. I was kind of ho-hum on it. But I thought the previews were pretty good. The trailers were pretty good for it. And I thought that Jamie Foxx's Electro was just an interesting enough choice that it might work. And so, I was going into it with an open mind. I think I saw it on opening weekend, actually. So then, again, the bell rang. So let's get right into this one. Director Mark Webb's follow-up to Amazing Spider-Man. And I'll just give a very brief overview of the plot here, and then get to the critique portion of the review. So basically, this one picks up pretty soon after the end of the first Amazing Spider-Man. We pick up with graduation, actually, of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. That's kind of the framing of the beginning portion of the movie. They're a happy couple. She knows he's Spider-Man. He's doing his thing. And then they have relationship drama throughout the movie that we'll talk about, I'm sure. He breaks it off with her because he can't stop seeing the image of her father, Captain Stacy, who he blames himself for the death of from the first movie. So that's something that haunts him to this day. Aunt May is having trouble with the bills, which is an all-the-time Spider-Man issue, no matter when you're reading Spider-Man comics. She's having trouble making ends meet, so he's trying to help her out. Although that's very, very little focused in the movie. And then you simultaneously get the character of Harry Osborn introduced here for the very first time. And he is portrayed by the actor Dane DeHaan. He is one of the new additions to the cast here. And he comes on and is given a backstory that we are told rather than shown of his long-standing friendship with Peter Parker, who he hasn't seen in 8 years. And it's established that he is approximately 18 years old. So basically they haven't seen each other since they were 10, yet he considers Peter, and Peter considers him to be their best pal. So that's happens. Norman Osborn, Harry's father, of course, is anyone who remembers our Spider-Man 2 review or any cursory knowledge of Spider-Man at all. Norman Osborn's Harry's dad, who is also in the comics the Green Goblin. He is not the Green Goblin here, but he dies of a mysterious ailment that he informs his son before he dies has been inherited by Harry. And he says it will kill you as it killed me. So you've inherited my curse, the Osborn family curse. Not to be confused, wrestling fans, with the Armstrong family curse. It's a totally different thing. So this goes on throughout the film. Harry Osborn...
Yeah, since it involves death, it would probably be more of a Von Erich family curse, wouldn't it?
That's morbid. But accurate. So as it goes on throughout the film, Harry bonds with Peter. They reconnect, and they bond over a hastily put together montage that I'm pretty sure involves them feeding deer in the park and shoving ice cream cones in each other's faces. And at one point, I think Peter actually says, "Why don't they just call him Girl George?" But anyway, they go on from there. Harry wants Peter to help him get Spider-Man so that he can get Spider-Man's enhanced DNA to help him out and cure him of his ailment. Peter declines. You get the creation through experimental means of the somewhat unique take on the Green Goblin. That comes up later in the film. In the process, Harry recruits the Electro character, who I haven't mentioned yet. Max Dillon, as played by Jamie Foxx, is something of a recluse, an aloof person who people don't recognize because he's got bad hair and bad posture and bad teeth and just generally acts awkward around everyone. He has a very weird subplot with Spider-Man that I'm not even sure how to make sense out of, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then at some point, he is bitten by radioactive eels and turned into an electric being known as Electro, who looks suspiciously like Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen film of 2009. And we may even have an appearance later on from Dr. Manhattan. I don't know. They work together to try to defeat Spider-Man, basically. Peter has to get over his issues. Meanwhile, you have a corrupt figure within Oscorp who's trying to oust Harry from his position. There's just a lot going on in this movie for it to be so uninteresting. So you can probably figure out how this one ends. Peter saves the day, but he suffers his greatest loss. That's right. They recreate the classic comic book death of Gwen Stacy as Peter. She's falling to her doom. Peter webs her up to save her, and she cracks her head on the ground, thus rendering her obsolete. So, and unfortunately, we don't have the ability to delete this movie. But, there's one other thing that I forgot to mention. Richard Parker, Spider-Man's father, and a subplot that goes absolutely nowhere in the film. So there's just a lot to unpack here, guys. One of the issues that people have always had with Spider-Man 3 is how many different subplots are being juggled throughout that film. I feel like this takes that problem and magnifies it to new levels. Well, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but it would be one thing if it had a lot of subplots that were all resolved in some sort of fashion. But the problem with this film is that during the production, the script was just apparently massive. And there were entire subplots that were shot and then cut from the movie. And there were also subplots, as you alluded to with the Richard Parker stuff, that were partially cut. Because all the Richard Parker flashbacks in this movie apparently were supposed to be building to the reveal that Richard Parker is still alive. And it was supposed to be words from Richard Parker that were going to spur Peter to get back on the horse and get back out there as Spider-Man after the death of Gwen Stacy at the end of the film. But when they cut the resurrected Richard Parker film, they didn't cut any of his other supplemental subplot material from the film, and thus you have this giant dangling open plot thread that goes nowhere and serves no purpose other than to give Spider-Man his fucking spider cave, which that's what we all thought is, you know what Spider-Man would be better with? A cave where he has gadgets and computers. God almighty.
Now, Russell,
Mark Webb apparently watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 a lot and thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. Let's give Spider-Man a random abandoned subway base because that's what he really needed. And then we're not even going to explain how it's fucking possible that his father built this train or took this train car that hides itself underneath these abandoned tracks. I mean, this is a pretty elaborate thing that Peter stumbles upon. And I'm just like, did nobody notice that this was happening?
Yes. Apparently it's the one central tunnel in the town that has been abandoned by everyone, and no one has paid any attention to, except Richard Parker, who's apparently single-handedly, because remember, he doesn't have any resources, so single-handedly constructed this entire weird underground layer.
It's so stupid. And this that whole plot was bad. One of those deleted scenes actually had Richard Parker saying the great responsibility line. Oh,
yes,
so
that was
bad.
that was the big climactic speech that was originally in the script, was Richard Parker showing up at Gwen's
fucking infuriating is what it is.
If they had on the one hand, it should never have been shot or written in the first place. On the other hand, I can at least understand why they cut it, because if you include that, does that not completely remove any significance of Uncle Ben?
Yes,
Like,
it actually
that's
removes
his lasting effect on Pete.
It removes quite a bit of effect on the character.
Now, granted, you know, in the first one we don't exactly get those words. We get
but you don't have to get those words.
We haven't gotten it in Homecoming either, and I don't think that we're going to, because I don't know that we're ever going to actually see Uncle Ben, and it's fine to move on from that because it's pretty much implied.
At this point, it's like it's one of those things in culture, like the Waynes getting killed.
Yeah,
you don't need to see it. Everybody knows what happens, and I would say that great power and great responsibility is probably the most universally known thing about Spider-Man's character. The same way that truth, justice, and the American way is associated with Superman.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, you can play around with that, hint at it, but just saying it outright, you don't have to, especially if it's coming from a character who, quite honestly, shouldn't even exist.
No, that's one of the big things about Peter's character is that his parents have been gone. They're not part of his. They're part of who he is, but they're only so in their absence. Once you bring them back, it cuts away some of the major building blocks of the character. So doing it this way was not well thought out. I understand the shock value of the idea, but that's all it is. It's just an oh my God moment. It's Patrick Duffy being alive in the shower. It's played purely for the shock value of it. But if I can be permitted to rant for one moment,
sure,
on something that is truly the most atrocious part of this film. Green Goblin 2, Harry Osborn, is what I consider to be the greatest Spider-Man villain of all time. Because of his personal connection to Peter. This is the classic version and the best version of, in my view, the best friend or worst enemy trope. But when it was done with Harry Osborn in the comics, it was built over a long period of time. It was an earned moment. You see this slow turn of Harry succumbing to the very same level of psychosis that his father did. But Harry is a far more conflicted character. Harry is not evil for its own sake at times. Harry feels betrayed by Peter. He feels, that especially once he learns that Peter is Spider-Man, he feels that just hatred for him because of the battles that Peter had with his dad, and of course because he holds Peter responsible for the death of his father. You see that very much in the Raimi trilogy. And by the time Harry in those films turns completely and becomes the second Green Goblin, it's a supremely earned moment featuring a fantastic actor who brought a level of sympathy and yet strong-willed menace to that role. Mm-hmm. Played beautifully by James Franco. Dane DeHaan is not even fit to be called a cardboard cutout version of James Franco. He's not even fit to be put in any film whatsoever. He is one of the most atrocious, least talented pieces of shit that I have ever witnessed on screen. And what he and Mark Webb did to my favorite Spider-Man villain should disqualify them from ever being involved with any superhero film. Not superhero film, any film going forward. How dare you? Fuck you for that. Fuck you for ruining what was at one time considered the greatest Spider-Man villain ever. Nobody's going to want to see it now. Thanks, pal. Thanks, asshole. You completely screwed this character on screen. After he just got completely screwed in Spider-Man 3, just as his story was really great. He got screwed over by a plot that was over-bloated, and then here again, the same thing happens, but oh no. No, it wasn't just the plot. It was the presentation altogether. You turned him into an actual fucking goblin. You injected him and turned him into an actual fucking goblin. What the actual fuck? Nobody could take that seriously.
A dentist's worst nightmare.
It was atrocious. It looked stupid. It looked like something straight out of Dark Crystal. I'm sorry, but this is just wrong. None of this worked on screen. He had no chemistry whatsoever with Andrew Garfield. He had no chemistry whatsoever with anything on screen. Even the inanimate objects that he's working with seemed bored and uninterested in anything he had to say. And you know what? That's how I felt watching him. He is the absolute dirt fucking worst thing I have ever seen in a Spider-Man movie. You know what? I want to go ahead and say it. Topher Grace's was better than this. Yes. I would rather watch 2.5 hours of Topher Grace's underdeveloped Venom than ever have to see Dane DeHaan in any movie ever again. That is where I'm at on this movie. Fuck it. You actually made Jamie Foxx's mustache-twirling piece of shit Electro look good. So I guess if there was one good thing you contributed to this movie, it was that. Congratulations. Go fuck yourself, and don't you ever get in another movie again.
I think Russell just had his Carl moment.
It certainly seems that way.
I can't blame him, because that's honestly that's how I felt leaving the theater after watching this, because Harry Osborn was the first, I guess, main Spider-Man villain that I carried when I was a kid. And his death issue is probably still my favorite Spider-Man issue that I've read.
Indeed.
And so the character's always had something, and that whole arc has always had something of a special place in my heart. And I thought it was played almost perfectly in Spider-Man 1 and 2 by Raimi. So the chance for them to do it again and to fix the issues that had come before was pretty enticing, admittedly. And then the execution. And not only was the arc cut short because you had to condense everything down into one movie, which was a dumb idea to begin with, but you get a truly wretched performance from Dane DeHaan, and a truly wretched direction for the character, a way that, I guess in my opinion, would be, I'm trying to think of an equivalent example of a terrible portrayal. Something like Halle Berry's Catwoman, which has no bearing at all to the comic book Catwoman. The difference here being that this was in a film that otherwise had the building blocks to be successful. Catwoman had no building blocks to be successful. This movie had building blocks, and we'll talk about those in just a second, that could have led to a successful, interesting movie. And you throw in the middle of it just a complete embarrassment of a characterization on the level of Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face in Batman Forever, which we've ranted about on this show before. It was that level of misreading a character, misunderstanding the emotional beats, and like you said, removing the conflicted nature of Harry Osborn, which was always there. So that was just wretched. I agree with you. And we're going to return to some of the negative stuff in this movie, and I'm going to give you a chance to rant as well, Nick. But first, let's talk about some of the things that did work in this movie. And I think primarily we're all on the same page here. The chemistry between Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy is out of the world.
It's great.
100% co-signed.
It's still the best romance that's been done in the Spider-Man film. Like, it's not even close.
I agree.
I mean,
absolutely.
Like, say what you will about the Raimi films, but one, Mary Jane was always hamstrung a little bit because she was being played by Kirsten Dunst, who was easily the least charismatic of those three leads that stretched across that trilogy. And also, like Russell said, the chemistry was just never there. They tried, and they gave it, a decent effort, but like it never jumped off the screen the way this did. Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, from the first moment they were speaking to one another in Amazing Spider-Man, and even to their last moment together in Amazing Spider-Man 2, that dynamic works. And it works without any real misses at any point. Yeah, there are frustrating character moments, where
there's a couple of bad scenes in there.
There are bad
weird
scenes.
Moment.
There are bad scenes, but that is caused by a really poor script. What I am saying is the chemistry and the believability of those two characters never falters, even through the worst moments in the script.
And one of those worst moments has to be their breakup scene.
Which one?
The first one.
Okay.
The one at the Chinese restaurant?
Yes. I cringe during that scene every time, mostly because we've just had them having this really great moment, this really great time at graduation, and Peter just completely flips on her at the next scene. Almost like, is this dude suffering from like a personality disorder or something? Because he's just like he flips the script completely on her.
And
I can't believe she took him back. Actually, like that.
Yeah.
I agree that scene is extremely frustrating, especially from the Peter perspective. But one thing they do in that scene that actually kind of softens the blow for me a little bit is Gwen gets fed up with his shit, and she's like, "You have pulled this crap one too many times." She was like, "No, forget this. I am breaking up with you." You hear, and then she like storms off from him. So like,
and that
which
probably should have
is
been
undone
it.
by the fact, yes,
Yes,
which is undone by the fact that she immediately accepts him back when he tries to get back with her.
That's true. I mean, I can't argue with that, but I can't sit here and criticize like constant cycle of breakup and reunion in a Spider-Man film when like that's one of my favorite aspects of the Ultimate Spider-Man comic is all the high school-esque relationship drama that he goes through.
It's not the concept of breakups and getting back together. It's the execution.
I agree. Yeah.
Of that.
Yeah,
I'm not defending it in any great way. No, it's
and it leads, like the fact that they get back together leads to one of the worst parts of this film, which is Gwen Stacy's death.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you wanted to put the characters back together, I'm good with it. As you pointed out, rightly so, that the makeup breakup thing, that's a huge part of Spider-Man's character arc, especially in his younger years, and even with he and Gwen. But what should have happened here is they should not have done the death of Gwen Stacy. They should have, I guess had her wind up basically saving his ass there at the end and then working it out that, hey, she can be part of your life while you're also doing this.
Well,
and you have a good team dynamic. But much like Sony's counterparts over at Warner Brothers, they were in such a hurry to get to the big classic moments that they crammed it all into a small space and thus render it meaningless by the fact that they did not make it an earned moment. It's not earned. It is so incredibly rushed. Like if they had Dane DeHaan, oh God, if they had just had Harry throughout this movie and not show him changing into or having any kind of goblin-esque transformation until like maybe the end credits or like the post credits, maybe this would have worked a little bit better.
And you can come back in the next movie maybe and do a Gwen death. But the thing about it is I'll get back to that later. But I think that the building blocks were there. Peter and Gwen relationship worked, but it was like the one thing that worked across both films, and you take it off the board with the death. But let's get back to that for a moment. Nick, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I think they were so tied to that Gwen Stacy death in this film for whatever reason is they were already setting up. That's one aspect we have to talk about. Sony had big plans for how they were going to, handle the Spider-Man franchise going forward. They were setting up, multiple films spinning out of this. And one of the things they had already made up their mind that they wanted to do in Amazing Spider-Man 3 was to transition away from Gwen Stacy and on to Mary Jane Watson. So much so that Mary Jane Watson was actually cast for this film in the form of actress Shailene Woodley, who filmed scenes for the film. And apparently, the film was supposed to feature, I shit you not, a Home Improvement-esque dynamic where she was going to move in next door to Aunt May and she and Peter were going to have extended conversations in the backyard while he was dating Gwen with the fence in between them without ever actually seeing each other's face. And then the film was going to end with him getting back on the Spider-Man horse figuratively by getting back out there after the pep talk from his dad, but also figuratively getting back out into the dating game by going on a motorcycle ride with the Mary Jane Watson who he would just be meeting in person or face-to-face for the first time.
Fuck you, Charlie.
I mean, all this horse shit. So they were so tied to the Gwen Stacy death, I think because they were in a hurry to get to Mary Jane, and so even though they cut Mary Jane from the movie, they left the Gwen Stacy death in. All in service of what I am assuming was to be a Dane DeHaan-led Sinister Six movie?
Yes. Which, again, you could do the Sinister Six without doing a Gwen death.
Or how about this? Yeah. Do the Sinister Six without doing a Sinister Six standalone movie. Just have the Sinister Six in Amazing Spider-Man 3. But apparently that wasn't the plan.
Now, have a Sinister Six that kills off this version of Harry Osborn. I'm good with it.
Yes.
It could be a Fatal Five. I don't give a shit. Just don't sit through this.
Actually, way to turn them babyface for their standalone movie.
It would.
Have them
they would be the heroes.
And actually, that may have happened, considering that one of the rumors and a post-credit scene that was cut featured Norman Osborn's head in a jar in the basement of Oscorp, and implied that he was going to be resurrected as a Futurama-esque head for the Sinister Six movie.
Good God.
There was nothing in this world, nothing about this movie made me happier to see it kill this franchise than knowing that. Because whenever that was revealed, that was the moment I said, I hope this franchise just died.
Norman Osborn's head in a jar. And so I can only imagine that the ultimate goal...
Richard Nixon.
Yes. Or perhaps the ultimate goal was a Krang-like situation where he would create a giant muscular body and his head would put in the stomach of that muscular body. I have no way of knowing.
Giving Mark Webb's apparent love of all things Ninja Turtles and let's make Spider-Man into that. Sure, why not?
So we did derail there for a moment, but I wanted to talk a little about the things that did work in the movie. And the Garfield and Stone relationship, which is, as Russell pointed out earlier, was a real-life relationship at that point, really popped off the screen. Even their and this is credit to Mark Webb as well, even their interactions with one another, where it's like playful banter, is some of the most realistic.
It's believable, yeah.
Relationship banter I've ever seen in a superhero movie.
Yep.
I mean, even good superhero movies don't do that well. We talked about it with the Marvel movies, or with Iron Man, even with other movies. Sometimes they don't do the romantic. Iron Man does pretty well, but a lot of the Marvel movies, the DC movies, the Batman movies have never done that romantic, playful banter very well. This one really does.
Yep.
So, what were some of your upticks on in that aspect of the movie, Nick?
Well, I mean, I think we've covered, the relationship chemistry, that, like you said, the banter. There were great scenes. I think there's the awkward scene where he is helping her escape from Oscorp at one point, and they're hiding out in the maintenance closet together. That's actually a pretty charming little scene. And that's one of those things, like I said, I was just getting so frustrated during the film because it would give me, this giant serving of dog shit and then follow it up with something that I legitimately want from a Spider-Man film. And it was just like the constant roller coaster of like moderate highs and Death Valley-like lows. So it was such a frustrating experience revisiting that I can't really adequately express. But and beyond just the Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone stuff, I mean, I gotta say, as a whole, Spider-Man himself supporting cast is actually pretty good. And primarily what I'm talking about there is Sally Field as Aunt May. And if you want to take it back to the first one as well, Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben. Both of those were really good reimaginings of those characters that brought them, in my opinion anyway, more in line with what I want from the character, which is something a little bit more relatable, which is to say, not a 900-year-old woman who's drawn like, or looks like Mr. Magoo. Sally Field at least brought some energy and charisma to the character. Not saying Rosemary Harris wasn't good. She was fine for that, that incarnation of the character. But it's also understandable that she could die at any moment, whereas Sally Field, you actually can see her going out and trying to pay the bills and having this believable dynamic with Peter that I wound up really enjoying. So that's one aspect of it that I wanted to throw some love to as well, with Sally Field.
Yes, to piggyback on that, I was away actually by Sally Field in this movie. I had forgotten how good she was in both of these movies. I know we all love Marissa Tomei as Aunt May in Spider-Man Homecoming for obvious reasons. But I would argue that the scene in Peter's bedroom where she is refusing to tell him about his parents is probably my favorite Aunt May scene that has been on screen to this point. I thought it was genuinely moving, and it got me to care about Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker in a way that I otherwise didn't. His acting in the scene was special. Her acting in the scene was spectacular, no pun intended. And I mean, the genuine emotion that was there, and the fact, the angle of this adopted parent who feels insecure because her kid wants to know more about his biological parents, and it makes her feel inherently flawed and less than. I've always been intrigued by that in Superman's mythos. And so I think that's why I particularly respond to that scene. I thought it was, for me anyway, probably my favorite scene in the movie, actually, until it derails, which it doesn't take long to derail when they get the labyrinthine conspiracy theory about Peter Parker's dad, who I will get to in a little bit. But yeah, Sally Field was great.
I agree. I think that Sally Field was a tremendous Aunt May. And credit where it's due, yes, Mark Webb actually did write her some very good scenes. And that one in particular you talked about in Peter's bedroom, that scene is equal parts tremendous and frustrating because there are times whenever she starts getting a little expository with stuff that honestly doesn't really matter. But otherwise, her direct connection with Andrew Garfield was so good. It was like we were seeing, that Aunt May and Peter relationship straight off the comic book page. It worked just so perfectly, and it's on the strength of her performance. She clearly took the material that she was given and took it very seriously, and that's something about Sally Field. I think in most of her roles, even if she's in a bad movie, she still puts forward the effort to. She knows how to craft her roles in the best possible way. And like I said, even whenever it's not in something that's necessarily very good. But that's a testament to her abilities as an actor. She's always done that. She knows to take that material and elevate it in the best possible way. And one of my favorite scenes with her and Peter is when she's working with, or she's trying to keep him from washing his clothes. She wants to do it. And he's trying to keep her from seeing his Spider-Man uniform. And she does remark that the last time he washed clothes, he turned everything like pink and blue, or red and blue, which I thought, it was a hilarious amount of back and forth. So it's not just the emotional stuff that she had going on with Andrew Garfield. They actually had really great banter back and forth, which is a testament to both of their abilities to take what could otherwise have been material and make it into something really good.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. One of the other things that I really liked about this movie were and I'll just call them hero moments, the mundane hero moments. What I mean by that are some of the complaints that people had about these Superman movies from Warner Brothers in recent years is that there weren't enough moments shown of Superman rescuing cats from trees, kids from the lost, things like that. There wasn't enough of that in some people's minds. Well, I thought this movie did that really, really well. When it happened, you see moments of Spider-Man not just swooping in and saving people, but stopping and having conversations with them, really playing up that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man situation, fist bumping a little kid, talking to a lady after he rescues her, just making it seem like Spider-Man is somebody that the community can trust. I thought that's one thing that the first Raimi movie did pretty well, and I thought this one did it very, very well in terms of showing those moments where Spider-Man is, yes, he has fun, and we all talked about how we wanted to see Spider-Man have fun in the movie because he was dealing with a lot of emotional trauma in the Raimi series. And yes, it's good to see Spider-Man have some fun, but I also want to see Spider-Man play up the friendly neighborhood aspect. And I thought those scenes in this movie, even up to the end, the very last scene where he's confronting Rhino, played by Paul Giamatti.
Dear God.
There's a little kid there that's dressed up as Spider-Man, and he shows up, and the way that he gets the kid out of the way is so human and so pitch perfect for that character.
I will say that was one of my favorite scenes of the movie, despite Paul Giamatti. Everything that he does,
careful, Nick will get triggered if you talk about Paul Giamatti.
Oh, I know. He loves him very much, but he's terrible as Rhino. And Rhino shouldn't have. I don't even know if he should have been included in the film. Although I did really enjoy that opening bit when Peter is chasing on that first time. Mm-hmm. And he's catching all those, we don't even know what they are, the jars of stuff or whatever it is that Rhino was...
Radioactive, I think it's plutonium, they said at one point.
Whatever it was certainly dangerous material that didn't need to just land in the street and break. Right. And as we're watching Peter catch all of it with, webbing with his hands and even at one point with the bottom of his foot, I thought that scene was done incredibly well. And you see him even then interacting with the public, as Greg was talking about. This movie truly encapsulated, and I think the first Amazing Spider-Man did it too. It encapsulates friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. That's what they were going for, and I got to tell you, Andrew Garfield was a master class in the Spider-Man banter. Mm-hmm. He was putting on a clinic in how you play the character, and I do have to give Tom Holland credit for keeping that tradition going. But man, I love the way Andrew Garfield does it, and the way you're talking about he interacts with kids. That he looks so natural doing it. So you can tell that this is probably something he's very good at in real life too.
Yeah. Nick, what were your thoughts on that aspect?
Yeah, it was great. And actually, you guys mentioned the ending of the film, but my favorite aspect of that, or example of that, is actually earlier in the film. He comes across a kid who has been picked on and had his science project, like, torn apart or whatever, and Spider-Man actually stops and talks to the
Great
kid
scene.
and helps him put his science project back together and, like, encourages the kid to be interested in science and says, no, man, you know, this kind of stuff is really cool. And, like, he used some web fluid to fix the kid's wind turbine and stuff. And that leads into another thing. One aspect of these films that they got right that I feel like the Raimi ones didn't, and honestly even Spider-Man Homecoming, which I love, hasn't really touched on, is Peter as a scientific expert, as Peter as a great mind. We see him here doing an experiment to, like, figure out how to keep Electro from being able to overload his web shooters and fry them. And so, like, that kind of stuff, which we also saw in the first film of him building the web shooters in the first place, that's been a missing element of the Spider-Man franchise on the big screen throughout several incarnations. So,
they came, this is revisiting old ground, but Spider-Man 2 kind of hit on that with his relationship with Octavius.
It did, but I felt like that was more, supposed to be more in service of having a personal connection to them than it was in service of strengthening Peter's character.
It was ancillary to his character rather than being like a true part of it like it was in this movie. Mm-hmm. And I'd also really liked that scene where he's trying to figure out how to insulate his web shooters. Some of that scene is a little odd and just a little bit too silly, I guess. But the bit with the fire extinguisher gets me every time. I thought that was fucking hilarious.
Yeah. Well, that got a line.
The main problem with that scene, much like many scenes throughout the film, is I think this has some of the worst soundtrack and musical accompaniment of any superhero film I've ever seen. Like, the score, the orchestral score is fine but forgettable, but anytime they choose to use a contemporary song or something with any kind of electronic element to it, it is awful. Yeah.
It's awkward as hell. It doesn't work.
It's like in the middle of the movie, there's this horrendous musical montage, I believe after he's broken up with Gwen, and the music that they choose for this montage does not fit at all. It really doesn't make you feel any emotion, because I'm not sure if it's supposed to be happy-go-lucky music. I'm pretty sure the montage is supposed to be somewhat somber because he's struggling with things, but it's so out of place. I agree, Nick. The music is very, very poorly chosen throughout the film. It's
just that we've touched on so many positive elements, whether it's his, them depicting Peter as intelligent, or his relationship with Gwen Stacy, or the Aunt May aspect, or his relationship with the community. And like, that's the frustrating thing about this movie is somewhere in there is a really, really good Spider-Man movie. There is the foundation for that. The problem is they slap onto that foundation a bunch of nonsensical horseshit. And nonsensical horseshit that isn't just nonsensical, but also untrue to key characters like Harry Osborn, like you guys said. Honestly, treats Norman Osborn as an afterthought, which, yes, we want to get to Harry eventually, but take your time. Don't be in a hurry. Like, have Norman...
Story, kid. Take your time, apply a hold, and work it.
But, I mean, look, case in point, the death of Norman Osborn. Why are we supposed to care if it's a Norman Osborn... the death of Norman Osborn is literally both Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn's first scene in the franchise, and we're supposed to care. For what reason? Like, it makes no sense.
The whole thing is very, very poorly constructed, poorly put together. What was that, Russell?
I was just saying that it's hard to care about a lot of things in this movie, but whenever it comes to the human interaction, at least as Peter is concerned, all of his stuff, you can tell that Mark Webb really gets that end of filmmaking. So, and Greg, you pointed this out while we were watching the movie. If they had just made this a romantic comedy starring Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, and have, you know, the Spider-Man stuff be kind of ancillary and just kind of off to the side and not like really all that heavily focused, this might have actually been a pretty damn good movie.
I agree.
There's just not much there on the Spider-Man aspect of it. Like whenever you start factoring in that stuff of it, the movie goes more than a bit off the rails. You've got
I'll have a hot take alternative version of this movie that I'll propose at the end of the podcast.
And I would suggest that if you're going to get, you know, a talented actor like Jamie Foxx to play Electro, which I thought was inspired casting.
Yes, I did too.
Maybe don't take him from being what you introduce him as, which is this meek, like insecure, introverted, you know, basically almost like I described him as like a human turtle version of the character, to being a like fully upstanding, look like he's jacked to hell and back, a mustache twirling villain in a span of 2 seconds. That does not work, and I don't understand how being bit by electric eel suddenly fixes your teeth either. But
there was no transition of that character. They cut the transition out of how he. And I think, Nick, that for you, if I'm correct, that was your Seinfeld GIF moment in the movie, was his transformation into this villain, right?
You know, I don't know what to say. I mean, the first time I watched it, I was trying so hard to give the movie every benefit of the doubt that I can't say it Seinfeld gifted me the first time. But yes, not his transformation necessarily. With that first showdown with Spider-Man, when it gets into the god-awful theme they use for
music.
Electro with Electricity, You Lie to Me, and all this other bullshit in the background. And also, like, the slow motion that is overdone throughout that entire scene, the CGI, which is either really good or god-awfully bad at times, it just bounces.
The scene too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It just bounces back and forth so inconsistently in terms of characterization, in terms of on-screen look, that everything relating to Electro, which was one of the film's selling points for me coming in, wound up being, behind Harry Osborn anyway, the biggest weight around the film's neck.
They had a chance with this version of Electro to make him an interesting, sympathetic villain with a unique quirk about him. And instead, he goes from Spider-Man's my best friend, he saved me, and he has some affinity for him, to hating Spider-Man and wanting to kill him within the span of, God, what would you guys say, 2-3 minutes?
If that.
It's like yeah.
It is maybe the single worst transition of character that's ever been in any comic book movie. And we've seen some bad ones. But this is just a complete waste of a character, a complete waste of an actor. Just as they were hitting on an interesting idea and a take on Max Dillon at the beginning of the movie, and even in his initial appearance as Electro, right after he gets his powers, his initial interaction with Spider-Man started off to be pretty decent. Like, we have something interesting going on here. Spider-Man's trying to talk him down and seemingly having some success.
Yep.
And naturally, things did need to go off the rails a little bit. It was just the way they did it. Like, something sets him off. I don't remember what it is, but I just know that something flips that switch. He starts, like, attacking people. And I thought, why did you have to do it that way? Why couldn't you have just had him lose control of his powers? It's not like he understands how to operate them yet. He's only had them for like 5 minutes. So
right.
Him like losing control and not being able to turn it off, you know, even if he's trying to, could have made, as you pointed out, Greg, could have made him a much more like sympathetic villain. It would have endeared him to the audience, and you know, it would have made this whole confrontation a lot more comps. But then again,
he would have been a lot more sympathetic than Harry was.
Yeah, like we would have wanted to see more of him, and I think that Jamie Foxx would have been able to really sink his now fixed and perfect teeth into that kind of. But instead, we got one of the most basic bitch villains that I've ever seen in any film.
Yeah, very generic. One more thing I want to get to, and then we'll kind of wrap things up mercifully.
Hey, Greg, real quick, let's not forget that first confrontation with Spider-Man leads Electro directly into Ravencroft Institute, where it gives us arguably the worst supporting character in the film, Dr. Kafka, who is doing the worst stereotypical German accent you've ever heard in your life.
Scientist. Did he not feel like he should be in Batman and Robin? Did that whole scene not feel like it was right out of Batman and Robin? Even down to Electro's look?
Did he not feel like it was in Batman and Robin?
And I will help you, Electro. And I will make sure I get to the bottom of it. Oh gosh, so bad.
I can't tell if that was Dr. Kafka or a police detective from comic book theater Watchmen.
Very similar. They're pretty much the character.
Indeed.
I thought you were going to go with Dr. Kevin Nash.
Oh, that would have been awesome.
Never know. So one thing I wanted to mention is we kind of hit on this in the beginning, but I feel the need to rant about one aspect of this movie that triggered me, and that is the entire Richard Parker concept. So the first scene in this movie, we are introduced in the past clearly to Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents. And they are on an airplane transporting some kind of material, data or whatever. And I don't know if Mark Webb had just watched the Bourne Ultimatum or Bourne Supremacy or what Bourne movie he had just watched, but I'm fairly certain he had just watched a Bourne movie, maybe the entire trilogy. Because on this airplane, Richard Parker, who is supposed to be the world's greatest chemical scientist, I suppose. He's this brilliant genetic scientist who's discovered this incredible human spider hybrid. Suddenly turns into Jason Bourne on an airplane and takes down a hired assassin that was hired to kill him. Clearly, beats him up with some slick martial arts moves because he's apparently a world-class martial artist, and marksman as well. Only for the plane to go down and seemingly destroy everyone on board. But, as we learn later, it didn't really destroy him. So that is annoying in and of itself, because I think that's kind of like the Bond movie where Denise Richards plays the brilliant scientist who's also super hot and also can do martial arts. So it's like, come on. So that sucked. But what it gets me to is the idea that they seem to be going to in this franchise of everything's connected. Nothing can be – he can't just have been bitten by a radioactive spider. It has to have been a radioactive spider that was genetically engineered by his father at the behest of Oscorp. So, again, this just frustrates me to no end, this concept that people have that everything has to be explained. Every single aspect of everything has to have some convoluted tie to everything else. There are no coincidences. There are no shit just happens. It's not Parker luck, as it turns out. It's Parker genetic engineering. His father set everything up and has this secret cave that I guess he hoped one day Peter would discover. I don't know. So it's just the whole thing. Apparently Peter didn't look in the sight of his father's his entire life. So, the whole thing is so frustrating to me, and it's not just with this movie, it's with the concept in general, but I think this movie has one of the most blatant examples of it, because I don't know about you guys' experience, and I haven't read enough of the Ultimate Universe to know how this ties in there, but no version of Spider-Man I've read has ever been compelling because, by God, I have to know more about his parents and how they – and I sure hope he was genetically engineered by someone and not something. It's not compelling. I don't need it. I had plenty in this movie. Believe me, you had plenty going on in this movie without involving some stupid subplot that doesn't even go anywhere except the underground layer.
Yeah, to speak real quick on the Ultimate Universe, his parents never really played a huge role in any story other than his father and Eddie Brock's father actually worked together to create the ultimate version of the Venom symbiote. So that's the only real tie there, but it is not a situation where it is implied that his father genetically modified himself to help him to become Spider-Man, which, by the way, is something that Mark Webb wanted apparently to do in Amazing Spider-Man 1 and was intending to ultimately reveal if there had been an Amazing Spider-Man 3. That was where he was all along.
Which kills my premise that I've had that this was another example of Sony stepping in and ruining a movie by pushing things in. No, it was going to be bad regardless. So
and Peter's parents angle has been played in comics before.
Sure.
There was that bit where they were revealed to be or set up to make it look like they were spies, and also that they were still alive. So they seemingly come back at one point, although that was revealed later to be a plot by, I want to say that was a plot by Chameleon.
Yeah. I remember that. That was one of the stories I read when I was a kid,
where they were that was not his parents at all, and
they weren't spies, as it turns out.
Yeah, his parents were not spies at all. That was pretty much the only angle that was played, that I recall, played with his parents being brought back into the story.
Bad was the actor that plays Richard Parker?
Awful.
Oh, atrocious. Almost not as bad as Dane DeHaan, but he was certainly bad. And you guys are absolutely right. If you're going to cut the wrap up, like the crescendo of your subplot, maybe cut the rest of it too, instead of leaving it in the movie to feel like a setup for something that ultimately doesn't happen and would ultimately have sucked anyway. So,
Peter, I am here to explain giant chunks of your history to the audience.
Could have saved us, 10, 15 minutes off this movie, just by, remembering to cut the rest of it.
Yeah.
And we could have opened, instead of opening with that stupid flashback to the plane sequence, we could have actually opened with that kind of awesome scene of Peter seemingly falling through the sky, and going on the rhino chase. Like that could have been your opening sequence, and it would have worked fine.
And the biggest problem with that plane sequence, I mean, beyond just Richard Parker, martial arts expert, is how fucking long it is. That is like a 7 to 8 minute long sequence. I mean, it is just unbearably long.
You know what it's like? We're not going to turn this into Dark Knight month early, but just the other day we watched The Dark Knight Rises, which has an extended plane sequence at the beginning. I want somebody, if they have the nerve, to compare and contrast the two plane scenes for me.
And how much better one is than the other. But
yes. But
no, and before we, Grant here, ready to move on, there's one more aborted subplot that is worth mentioning, in addition to Richard Parker and in addition to Mary Jane Watson, and that is the fact that Felicia Hardy is in this film.
Oh, yeah.
Played by Felicity Jones. Apparently there was a subplot where we as the audience were going to have information that her father had been screwed over by Oscorp at one point, and she had managed to work her way up the Oscorp ladder, and she was actually pulling this to try and drive Harry insane in order to, orchestrate the ultimate downfall of his family. And if that subplot had been in the movie, that's moderately interesting to me. But the problem is they cut out that entire subplot and left a just very ultra generic version of Felicia Hardy that has nothing in common with any version of Black Cat that I've encountered.
And
you turned into Mean Gene for just a moment.
Yeah.
They could have left that plot in there if they'd have just cut out the rest of the Richard Parker bullshit. And it actually worked okay.
And that would have made the Harry going insane so quickly pill a little bit easier to swallow, although it still would have been utter bullshit. It would have at least, given some sort of storyline for it.
And then it would have frustrated me about Felicia Hardy, because it would have almost made her irredeemable at that point, because it's such a nefarious plot. But nonetheless, time to start wrapping up here. Before we do, I did want to say, you hit upon it earlier, Russell. If all things being equal, if I could go back, we've talked a lot on our podcast about how I'm a big fan of what Fox is doing with their X-Men movies, because they're taking big chances. Not all of them are going to, but they're taking big chances with characters like Deadpool, with the movie Logan. If I could go back in time, if Sony really wanted to do something different why not do a Spider-Man romantic comedy? You still have a villain, obviously. You still have some fighting going on, but it's almost ancillary to the will they, won't they romantic banter between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Can they commit to one another? Can Peter overcome his demons? Can she forgive him? Can she put up with his constant flakiness, maybe? Because the best parts of both these movies are Garfield and Stone. And so, I don't know. It may not work. It probably wouldn't. But this movie didn't work either. So I think in hindsight, it would have been interesting to see them really lean heavy into the rom-com aspect of this and almost leave the superhero stuff you still have him saving kids. You still have him, duking it out with, Rhino or Electro or whoever the villain is. But that's almost a subplot rather than the plot, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would have watched that movie.
Absolutely. Well, so everybody give your final thoughts on this one. Oh, before we do, I guess I should mention, this movie ended up making over $700 million at the box office, almost 3 times its budget. But it still underperformed to expectations, apparently, from the studio because it made $50 million less than its predecessor, The Amazing Spider-Man. So it was clear that interest in the franchise, while you're going to have interest in any Spider-Man movie, it was clear that the interest was dwindling down, and it did end up being the lowest grossing of all the Spider-Man movies. And apparently that's what led Sony in their to eventually negotiate with Marvel Studios and led to the excellent Spider-Man Homecoming. So, Nick, your final thoughts on this one?
It's a awful film that has some real nuggets of greatness buried within it, but those nuggets of greatness are not enough to overcome a nonsensical plot, bad characterizations, the worst score/musical accompaniment in superhero history, and
Feller plays the guitar.
That's right, and it's just all around, guys. It's just a train wreck, and I can't really describe it any other way. But because of those moments that are so good, and because of my expectations coming into this, it ultimately falls on that Green Lantern scale for me, where, don't get me wrong, it's bad, but it hurts me more because of how disappointing it was and less because of how bad it was, if that makes sense.
Russell, your final thoughts.
If you're contemplating actually watching this movie, ask yourself, would I be willing to dig through the piles and piles of human shit to find just a couple of nuggets of gold? If your answer is yes, then hey, go for it. But my answer is sounding no. Watching this with you guys, while fun, spending time with friends, it's a terrible film, and there's really not here to redeem it, even with the great chemistry between the two leads. It's just maybe one of the dirt worst superhero movies ever made. Put it right there with Suicide Squad, with Batman for Batman and Robin,
Elektra, Catwoman.
Yeah, it's really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Frustrating on the same level as Green Lantern, but maybe just a touch worse.
I could probably agree with that.
So I'm going to just leave it there. Just don't bother with this film. Wipe it from your memory and be thankful that we have a Spider-Man franchise now that seems to be working a bit better.
Yeah, and I will say as well, it's not a good movie on any level. There's good stuff in it, but the beauty of the internet is there's probably, knowing fandom, there's probably a YouTube video you can find that has all of the Garfield and Stone on-screen footage rolled in playlist or some individual video. You can probably find all their scenes on YouTube. Just watch those. Don't watch anything else. Maybe if you can find a Sally Field scene or two. But it's not a good movie. I wouldn't say that it's on that level of the Catwoman level of the worst movies I've ever seen related to superheroes, but it's bad. I do think it's worse than Green Lantern. I think it's easily the worst Spider-Man movie.
Yes.
Can't recommend it, unfortunately. But with all that being said, perhaps you disagree. I know this movie probably does have it out there. Let us know. You can contact me and Nick on Twitter. I am gphillips8652. He is Nick Duke87. drop us an email, gregp@placetobenation.com, nickd@placetobenation.com. Of course, you can find all of us on the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page. We've had a lot of great activity there recently. Russell, how can folks get in touch with you?
Hit me on the Twitter machine at Russell_Sellers. And apparently somebody was trying me earlier today who was a fan of our Marvel Age podcast and couldn't until I saw his tweet. So
a WWE referee, actually.
Yes,
so
a WWE referee. So that was kind of awesome. But in case you're wondering, to help you get a little more specific, it's at RUSSELL_SELLERS. That's how you find me.
Excellent.
Hit me up there and check out my
people. Yeah, I was going to say, where can people find your podcast?
Check out Marvel Age Podcast. That is kind of my primary show right now. The podcast is undergoing a bit of a metamorphosis. Still working out the finer details of that, but stay tuned. We've gotten some interest from folks on that moving now. So I think that's going to wind up being okay, and I hope you guys will like what I'm planning to do. And you can also check out my final Dark Knight Metal podcast, Pod Blast, whatever we called it, along with a quickie rundown review of Justice League No Justice I did with the manager, Todd Weber. That episode is up now, along with our most recent episodes of Marvel Age. So go listen to all that and then hit us with the feedback. We'd love to hear.
I really listened to that Pod Blast because I picked up Justice League #1, and I have a few questions that I'm sure would be answered by listening to that Pod Blast. So that's definitely going in the queue.
Yeah, so we do spoil the hell out of Metal and No Justice. So if you're
fine with me.
Yeah, okay, good. If you're good with spoilers, then go. Go for it. If you want to avoid it, maybe wait.
Right. And of course your last seller's points was on Image Comics for folks out there that are I know we have listeners that are big into Image, so you can find out all about the seller's points. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a break. Thanks to Russell for joining us. And of course when we come back on the other side, we'll have Reading, Watching, and the rundown, including thoughts on a cavalcade of comic book news stories. So stick with us. You won't regret it, hopefully.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We offer them to you on two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, along with Main Event, Survey Says, the Monday Night Wars, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction show, as well as Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network podcasts and pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Match of the Week podcast, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Through the Years, Worldcast, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Center Stage, and Letters from Kayfabe, plus much more. And on our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, NBA Team, PTBN Play, Sunday Groove, Breaking Balls, and Lucha Undead.
As well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans.
With the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversations, Geek and Sassy, and Marvel Age podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback today. All these shows, plus others, available at PlayStation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects, and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlayStation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads, Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and thehistoryofwrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlayStation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome back to the L-shaped studio. I am your host, Greg Phillips. With me is your co-host, fellow host, Nick Duke. And we are here. We thank Russell for joining us to talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2. We got to get right into our weekly look at the news and notes in the world of comics, Nick. We have to get into our segment that we like to call Rundown.
Welcome to the Rundown, where we talk some comic news. Welcome to the Rundown, where we talk about movies too.
Yeah, we got massive week. Like kind of an unexpectedly big week, because typically what happens time of year is comics news, you know, the big two kind of shy away from putting a lot of stuff out there just because this week is E3 and they kind of let video games have the nerd culture moment for the week, but that has not been the case. A shockingly busy week in the world of comics.
Absolutely. And it starts at the very top, at the executive level in the world of comics, because perhaps the most important one of the most important, and certainly the first domino in this sequence of huge news stories revolving DC Comics came out this week when longtime DC Entertainment president Diane Nelson officially has left her position in the company. She served as Warner Brothers Consumer Products president and DC Entertainment president. She took a leave of absence in April, but a memo from Warner Brothers chairman and CEO Kevin Tsujihara says that she is done with the company. So Dan has been with DC for, I'm trying to find that exact number here, for about a decade, I think, and very well loved by creators. Scott Snyder, I know, Jeff Johns, and several others have already tweeted or talked publicly about their love of Diane Nelson and how she has kind of been one of the spearheading people behind DC embracing creators in the last several years. You know, they mended fences with Greg Rucka. They mended fences with a number of creators, actually, and at least are on warmer terms with Mark Waid, given that they're releasing his old Flash volumes. So this came as a pretty big, shocking announcement this week, Nick.
Yeah, it really did. You know, I can't. Diane Nelson leaving is one of those things from a fan perspective. It's kind of hard to quantify because we don't really ever hear much about what her, you know, managerial style is. We don't hear about her having hands-on involvement with the characters and with the books and with the titles and those sorts of things. You know, we obviously hear that she's well respected by creators and by people who have worked with her, but it's kind of hard to draw a direct line from her to the products, you know, the finished product that arrives in our hands. However, the trick from her departure definitely is going to be one felt by fans in some negative ways, but I got to be honest, a lot of really positive ways.
Exactly. I think that the story coming out of this huge story that just broke this week, that had us worried based on the headlines. Yeah. And then we read the body of the text and suddenly became thrilled. And it is that Jeff Johns is out of DC, officially out of DC Entertainment. He is no longer the DC Entertainment president and chief creative officer. Johns instead will be launching his own comic book imprint. Was a film production group that will work exclusively with Warner Brothers and DC. So basically, to Cliff Notes this, before we get into the details, Jeff Johns is now going to have an independent publishing company that works with DC Brothers, and basically will be going from the boardroom back to the creative room and will be much more hands-on with writing comics, television, and film. Let's address that before we get into the details.
You know, it's one of those things where, like we said, when I first read the headline, my heart sank. And then this is probably the best example I can think of in a while of don't always just read the headline. Sometimes I actually read the story, because the story paints an entirely different picture than the headline. The headline makes it like he's leaving DC altogether. And what he's really doing is transitioning out of the executive role and back into the role of active creator, but an active creator who is contracted with DC to work across multiple formats, media, whether it's comics, television, or film. And I, for one, am stoked. If the vision laid out in this story is accurate, and that's the level of involvement we can get from Jeff Johns in a creative capacity over the next few years, I can't freaking wait.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned on our Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook group when we were discussing this with our pal Ben Morris is there have been far too few Jeff Johns comic books in the last 3 years. Pretty much since the launch of Rebirth, which he spearheaded, we've only gotten Doomsday Clock since then, which is great. But that's like 5
DC
issues.
Universe Rebirth.
Well, true, that's what he started with.
Yes.
But since that issue, all we've had, and that was 2016, all we've had is Doomsday Clock, 5 issues. That's not enough for my favorite comic book creator. So it sounds like we're about to get a lot more of that. So the first thing we're going to address is Jeff Johns' DC imprint. You know, we talked a few weeks ago, Nick, about Brian Michael Bendis getting his own DC imprint. Well, Johns' DC imprint will be known as the Killing Zone, and it will, quote, focus on new and lesser-known DC characters and titles. So it sounds like he's really going to be focusing on both creating his own new characters and also taking maybe some characters we've forgotten about along the way and putting that Jeff Johns touch on them, which we've talked about before on our podcast, that he has a way, unlike any creator I can think of taking a heretofore forgotten character and making them relevant again. Whether it was Black Hand, whether it was Sinestro, and the list is almost endless. So that's pretty exciting. We don't know a lot of details about this one yet, but what are your thoughts on this imprint of his?
Oh, obviously I'm stoked. If you had told me, 2 years ago that in 2018 we were going to have entire lines of DC Comics that were dedicated to just Jeff Johns and Brian Michael Bendis, that just would have made my fanboy heart go aflutter. And the fact that that is happening now, I can't. It's not good for my wallet, but it's certainly good for my fandom.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there, because Jeff is also getting back involved with the main DC continuity. In addition to continuing Doomsday Clock, it was announced that he will also be launching 2 new titles. First will be Shazam, which will be picking up a character that he obviously reimagined in his New 52 Justice League run and backups, and sort of redefined for a new era, which we will be reviewing that run actually when the Shazam movie comes out next spring.
Next year,
so
yes.
So he's taking over the Shazam character alongside an artist to be named. So we don't know who will be drawing it. It probably won't be Gary Frank, who did the miniseries with him. Gary Frank is tied up in Doomsday Clock and the announced continuation of Batman Earth 1, which is announced on the website for the new Jeff Johns startup. That is going to come out in the fall, and then the other miniseries he's going to be working on is going to be known as The Three Jokers, or actually 3 Jokers. And of course, this is picking up the thread that Johns teased in his classic Justice League number 50 at the end of the New 52, in which Batman has gained the knowledge that there are 3 separate Jokers, apparently, in the DC universe. So this is a story that is going to be worked on by Jeff Johns and his former Justice League partner, Jason Bach, who has been raving on Twitter about how excited he is about this story. So we've waited a long time for three Jokers, Nick, and then also Shazam.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what it is at this point. If it's Jeff Johns writing comics regularly again, it at least ensures that you and I are going to be checking it out. I mean, I can't remember the last time I was ever disappointed by a Jeff Johns comic, an ongoing at least. So, we're here for it, and I'm ready to see it.
Absolutely. And his announcements were not limited to comics either, because in addition to the comics that we talked about, Jeff Johns also surprised many people with the announcement that he will both write and produce Warner Brothers' planned Green Lantern Corps movie. And in another story I read elsewhere, DC confirmed that the movie will be based on Johns' classic comic book run. So DC announced that the movie will be based on the 9-year run that Johns had on Green Lantern. Jeff Johns actually on Facebook already published the opening line of his script, which is something he says that he's dreamed of writing his entire life in a movie. Zoom or fade in on a green ring soaring through space. This is ridiculously exciting, Nick. I know for both of us. The original story a couple years ago was that David Goyer was working with co-writer Justin Rhodes on the script. Now we find out it's Jeff Johns, that it's based on his run, and that we did get confirmation as well that the movie will star both Hal Jordan and John Stewart. Nick, your thoughts on this announcement? Are you as excited about it as I am?
Well, clearly this is thrilling news. It makes me feel more secure that movie might actually happen, although I'm still at the point of until I see a trailer or a production photo or something that indicates they're actually spending money on it, real legitimate money, then I'm going to remain somewhat skeptical. But this is certainly good news, and I'm trying to keep my expectations tempered because we know what happened the last time we got our expectations up about a Green Lantern film that also had Jeff Johns involved.
Absolutely. I think the hope and the difference this time is that Johns is the screenwriter, which in the first one there were 5 different screenwriters. It's interesting to follow the development of that script. We touched on that a little bit, I think, in our podcast on it.
My only concern becomes how many DC movies in recent years haven't had their initial scripts noted to hell by executives and torn up by subsequent rewrites. So, again, I'm excited, but I'm trying
and you have to find the right director with the right vision, the right actors, and all that stuff. And again, it has to happen because, if Aquaman fails, if Wonder Woman 2 underperforms, if Shazam bombs, we may not even see this movie. So I hope, but I will say this. Removing the cynicism for a moment, this is the most Blue Lantern announcement from DC Films in quite some time.
Yes, I agree. I mean, it's hopeful. I'm just wary still. I've been burned one too many times by Warner Brothers.
Nevertheless, we remain non-tentatively optimistic moving forward. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have where once there was a void, there must be someone to fill it. So with Jeff Johns stepping down as the DC Entertainment Chief Creative Officer, his collaborator, Jim Lee, the current DC publisher alongside Dan DiDio, will step in and fill Jeff's creative role as Chief Creative Officer. Lee joined DC 20 years ago when they bought out Wildstorm, and he's been the publisher since 2010 alongside Dan DiDio. Now he will step in and also fill the role of Jeff Johns in the boardroom. So Jim Lee continuing to move up.
Yeah, good for Jim Lee. I don't really know how this will affect us. We don't really know too much about him as a a chief creative officer type or a bigwig, so to speak. But we'll see how it goes.
Yes, indeed, and I will love Jim Lee. He's my favorite comic book artist of all time. I do hope that he is as staunch a defender of the characters as Jeff Johns has been. So hopefully, maybe even who knows, maybe he'll even be more assertive. We'll see. Good luck to him. Another bit of news that I think has us trying to manage our expectations Again, John tentatively excited. We found out this week that I have the ability to click and it actually opened on my phone. And as part of that, I'm finding out right now as I kill time that the DC Universe streaming service is currently, again, tentatively planned to be launched in late August of this year. And that is according to DC's community manager, Danny Snow, in a podcast interview. She also mentioned during the podcast interview that in addition to a back catalog of TV shows and movies, they are also going to have their original shows, which they've already announced. And she said, we're going to have a lot of comics on there. There's going to be a lot of stuff on there. Help me, Nick.
We don't know what that means yet. It very well could be exclusive content, original content. It could be a limited selection of back catalog content. It could possibly be a plan to possibly have some sort of Marvel Unlimited type service, but only focusing on new comics, kind of 6 months after the fact, adding single issues without any real extensive deep dive into the back catalog. It's hard to say. Obviously, the dream, as we have been beating the drum for 4 years now, is a Marvel Unlimited style, full-on digitalization of their entire back catalog that would be available to us, for one low monthly price or annual price or whatever. But we still don't know that that's necessarily the case. But it does seem like we're closer to that than we've ever been before. Let's keep our fingers crossed that
Yes.
winds up being the case.
And boy, would it help the longbook hunters a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we would have the entire publishing history, not the entire publishing history, but the bulk of the publishing history of the main two comic book publishers at that point at our fingertips. So that would certainly be awesome.
And I even have a suggested price to charge for this service, Nick.
What's that?
$9.99.
So you're saying $9.99 for their original television content and all their comics as well?
Let's start low. Let's negotiate low, and then see where they'll give us.
You would be the worst businessman of all time. You know what? $9.99.
I don't care about their business. I care about my wallet.
The fact of the matter is
we know what we'll pay for this service.
Yes. If it winds up being the ultimate version of a DC service, to mean that it has all the television shows, all the movies that aren't tied up in any kind of legal entanglement,
is that your price?
And a back catalog of comics that covers the vast majority of history, set your price. Yeah, $25 a month, probably. I'd pay that.
Yeah. Even if it's just the new comics, like you said, I would be willing to pay more than I currently pay for the WWE Network for that.
Yeah,
for sure. So, and that's not comparing the value to, because I would never give up the WWE Network, but I would pay more for this DC service for sure. So we'll. And maybe at some point Marvel will get their own, add TV and movies onto Marvel Unlimited. That would be cool too.
Mm-hmm.
So good stuff all around. But the DC announcements do not stop there, as it turns out, because they also announced that the Vertigo imprint is returning, and it's returning to its roots with 7 brand new titles, all of which will focus on, quote, modern, socially relevant, high-concept, inventive stories appealing to readers of all genres. They are rebuilding DC Vertigo. Mark Doyle, who was the Batman editor for Scott Snyder's Batman run. They are focusing on new voices, and we got a couple of here. Border Town by Eric M. Esquivel and Ramon Villalobos. We've got Hex Wives from Ben Blacker and Mirka Andolfo. American Carnage by Brian Hill, with art by Leandro Fernandez, which actually sounds really good. Goddess Mode by Zoe Quinn and Robbie Rodriguez, not the ghostwriter, Robbie Rodriguez. And
High Level
by Rob Sheridan. and Barnaby Bagenda. What a great name.
Mm-hmm.
Safe Sex by Tina Horn and Mike Dowling, also known as Ric Flair's least favorite comic. Second Coming by Mark Russell and Richard Pace, also known as Ric Flair's favorite comic. I thought you'd like that one. And that's it.
And that's in addition, by the way, to the 4-title Sandman universe that's already been announced previously as part of this relaunch.
Yes.
So Vertigo, upon its arrival, or its re-debut, will be 11 titles deep. So a pretty strong commitment from DC right out of the gate.
Yeah, I gotta say, some of these titles are pretty compelling too. Some of these concepts.
Absolutely. The one I most immediately is the one that, will earn probably the ire of most conservatives and religious types, that being Second Coming, with the pitch being God sends Jesus to Earth in hopes that he will learn the family trade from Sunman, an all-powerful superhero who is like the varsity quarterback son God never had. But upon his return to Earth, Christ is appalled to discover what has become of his gospel and vows to set the record right. And you know what that sounds like, Greg? It sounds like a modern-day version of Preacher, and I am here for it.
That's high shoes to fill.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying like in terms of
yes.
In terms of quality.
I have levels for my. If it's good though, I can tolerate it. We'll see. Because I love Preacher, as you know.
Yes.
But we also have from the world of comics, or not world of comics. We've been talking about that. The world of television. And that is a bit of a shocking announcement for me, anyway. Mm-hmm. Keenan Lonsdale, who portrays Kid Flash on both Legends of Tomorrow and The Flash, will not be returning as a full-time cast member on either show next year. He will be appearing in the Flash premiere, and then subsequently he may pop up for guest shots here and there, but will be a full-time cast member. Big surprise here for me, Nick. I did not see this one coming.
Yeah, we discussed on last week's show that he was leaving Legends of Tomorrow as a series regular, but we kind of both assumed that just meant he was going to play a big role on Flash. Well, family dynamic on that show seeming to be a big part of the eventual season 5. Is that it? I'm losing track of my Flash seasons at this point. But
yeah, that's right.
Apparently that's not the case, and he is just moving on entirely. So that's really weird. And if I know he'll probably have some guest shots there, but if this really is the end of Wally as a regular contributor, I gotta say, kind of probably the only character in the Flash mythos to this point they've really just mishandled was Wally West, because outside of that initial arc about him getting powers, the writers never really knew what to do with him after that, and I kind of am left with the CW version of Wally West being something of a disappointment for me.
I can see. I thought they rehabbed him a lot, though, last year on Legends of Tomorrow. I thought that he really fit seamlessly in on the cast. He had good rapport with the cast members, and I thought he was we talked about this, he was a much more natural fit on Legends than he was on The Flash. For some reason, he didn't really have chemistry with any of the leads on The Flash, except for Joe, who, as you mentioned, everybody has chemistry with him. And so I think it's kind of a shame, like to your point, a little bit of missed opportunity that he's leaving. And I get it. He's got personal reasons why he's leaving. But it would be great to see him come back and have another season on Legends for him to really gel and find his own and get some really nice hero moments for Wally, which he's kind of been lacking a little bit. So I agree with you to go on that. And then we get hit today with the biggest DC-related news, which is that the Time Warner and AT&T merger has been confirmed after the U.S. Department of Justice lost its antitrust lawsuit to prevent the merger. Now, we say this is the biggest news, but we don't actually know how this will affect us as fans. We know that it will accelerate content and stream initiatives between Time Warner Properties and AT&T, but we just don't know what the ultimate impact will be. But I would suggest that Diane Nelson leaving, Jeff Johns leaving, could be ramifications of all of this. So we'll see where all this goes. Nick, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, just a wild bit of speculation. As a direct, after the AT&T DirecTV merger, one of the things that came out of that was an attempt by AT&T to bundle its multiple products and services into one thing and encourage people to use more of its products and services. So I wonder if there's not a possibility that DC streaming service might not eventually be offered at a discounted price to AT&T/DirecTV subscribers. That is a wild bit of speculation on my part, but I wonder if there might not be an opportunity for some corporate synergy there.
I wonder if that extends to DirecTV Now, the terrible streaming service that I subscribe to.
I don't know.
Anyway, well, moving on, let's get into something that will affect both DC and Marvel, and that is, at least briefly, the return of the classic spinner racks. Now, for younger listeners, people who maybe have just gotten into comics the last few years, a spinner rack was a rack that spins. And on this rack that spins, back in the day being from the mid-'90s back, you could walk into a convenience store, into a grocery store, into a toy store, whatever you may find, and you would see these racks sitting there right in front of the checkout register. And they'd spin around, as the name implies, and you would have about 15 and 20 different comic book titles on this spinner rack. And they'd just be kind of stacked, like maybe 5 copies of each comic stacked behind each other. And if you were a kid, for instance, and your mom was making you go buy groceries with her, and you had to sit through the doldrums of her buying laundry detergent and whatnot, when you got to that checkout aisle, if you were a good boy or girl, sometimes your parents would buy you a comic book to reward you. And so, not that I speak from experience. So this is actually how a whole generation of kids got started on comics, was by finding them on these spinner racks. Well, why do I bring that up? GameStop has announced that 40 locations, and I don't know these specific locations, will be reinstituting spinner racks on a test basis to see how it goes. And they will be selling a limited supply of Marvel and DC comics at these spinner racks. The thought being that perhaps there's better crossover between the gaming and comics community than they previously thought, so that maybe the people that go in now and buy those what are those little toys called that they sell at GameStop, Nick, that are popular, the small action figures?
Funko Pops.
Funko Pops. So maybe the people that walk into GameStop and buy Funko Pops might buy a comic book while they're there if it looks intriguing. So I know that there are two sides to every coin, and there are some comic book retailers that are not happy about this until if GameStop expands it to their other stores. However, I feel very strongly that this is a very good thing, and I really hope. I don't really give a single crap about GameStop. I don't care if they succeed with it or not. Why I kind of want this test run to succeed is I want to see spinner racks come back. I want to see them at Publix, which is a grocery store here in the South. I want to see them they're in the South. We're in Vancouver right now. I want to see them at Walmart. I want to see them. I want to see comic books be accessible again to kids. Kids that maybe their parents aren't predisposed to going to a comic book store. Kids that maybe have never read a comic in their lives, but they've seen the TV shows. Kids that maybe when they read this limited selection of comics, let's say they buy a Superman comic or a Batman comic, and they read it and they like it, and then they're driving down the street with their parents and they see a comic book shop, they can beg and annoy and nag their parents and essentially force their parents to take them to the comic book shop, which a rising tide lifts all ships. So I know that there are very valid concerns, but for me, I think it's a positive, and I really hope it works.
Yeah, I mean, to present the flip side of that, the main reason that I think people are a little bit anxious is because the industry for so long has been entirely dependent upon the direct market. And if this were to take off, it would feel like something like a slap in the face to those direct market shop owners who have kept the industry afloat for so long. So it's something of a double-edged sword. I ultimately fall down on your side of the argument, where I think that anything that can be done to make it more mainstream and more accessible to a larger general audience is ultimately a good thing. Now, here's the argument is GameStop really making it available to a larger general audience? Technically, yes, but it's still a niche audience. Your ultimate dream of grocery stores and Walmarts and stores, that's the ultimate pipe dream. Now, will that ever happen? Is there a direct line that can be drawn from GameStop to grocery stores? That's a better question, but this could be potentially the first small step down that road.
And regardless, whether it gets to grocery stores or not, video games are more popular than comic books.
True.
By a wide margin.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So you're going to get more. I mean, I went to GameStop here in Troy, Alabama the other day, and in the time that I was there, 6 different kids below the age of 10 came into the store. And it's, you can be at a comic book shop for an hour and you might see one. So I think we got to do something to build up a new generation of readers, and I think succeeds on that level while also hopefully supporting the local comic book shops that are the lifeblood of the industry. So, but we'll see where all that goes, and I totally get where you're coming from on the other side of that. So, we also got the release this week of the trailer for the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse animated film that comes out this December.
Yep.
And this is, it says it's the first full trailer. There was a previous teaser trailer that was released.
There was.
And we were both extremely underwhelmed by that one. This one continues the mission style from that one, introducing Miles Morales, introducing an older version of Peter Parker, and introducing Spider-Gwen as well at the end of it. I gotta say, Nick, I actually was really impressed by this.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we discuss anything about this film, we're going to do it with the caveat of we're going to have to just put discussions of the animation style aside. Like, it is one of those things where when the characters aren't moving, I like it has this comic book-like feel, but when they're in motion, it looks very clunky, and there's no way around it. That being said, the writing, the humor, the characterizations, and the action in this trailer, man, I'm for this. Like, it looks really good. I mean, like, as a Miles Morales fan, and it's hard to get too excited based just on a trailer, but it looks like they got a lot of stuff right, Greg. A lot of stuff right.
Yeah, and I gotta say, even for me, I'm talking about the motion looking clunky. For me, even the action sequences in this, for the most part, looked really good, where he's swinging through the city, where he's having battle. I thought that anytime it was characters just talking and moving, it wasn't as good. But, or just like, even just walking in the forest, it didn't look good. But yeah, like you said, we have to put that aside. But I thought the action looked good. I thought the writing looked good. I'm a little iffy on Peter Parker's voice.
Yeah, I'm
sure
not.
It's one of those things that I'll get used to.
Right. It's very different than any version of the Peter Parker voice that I've heard in animation before. And it's also, honestly, a much older version of the character than I was expecting to see. Or at least he's implied to be much older than we were expecting.
5 o'clock shadow,
right?
Which is something you don't really see on Peter Parker that much.
Kind of a little bit of a dad bod going on, because he stuffed his face with fast food, has the big cheeks and jowls and stuff. Like, a little bit of a different Peter Parker, but not one that I'm necessarily opposed to. And perhaps, if we're doing full-on Spider-Verse, maybe part of his whole angle is that there's going to be a Spider-Girl or a, God help me, a Spider-Ling involved in this film somehow as well.
It could be. We don't know what the status of MJ is in the movie, so we'll have to see where that goes. But yeah, I think it's something I could get used to. The voice, when I first heard it, but I think it's because we're used to hearing a high-pitched, higher-pitched,
ultra-energetic Peter Parker.
Yeah, Peter Parker, and this is more of a deep-voiced New York Peter Parker. Some of the most New York Peter Parker that we've gotten.
Right.
So
while we're on the topic of voice actors, did you pick up on who was voicing Spider-Gwen in the movie?
No, I did not.
Haley Stenfield from True Grit is voicing
Spider-Gwen
in the film. So quite a cast they're putting together at this point, and I was already excited about the movie, even despite the bad animation, just because it's an animated film largely directed at kids that I might be able to get something out of, which means it's a movie I don't dread taking my kids to see. So I was looking to that the entire time. So this will definitely be a theatrical watch for me, but now my expectations, my hopes of the film's actual quality are starting to tick up a little bit as well. So, yeah, I thought this was all damn good trailer.
Well, speaking of things that are for you,
oh,
I don't think that it gets much more for you than the announcement from Marvel of As Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes, what a brilliant idea! I never even considered that as a title for a comic.
First of all,
but
does
God,
that
it's
not
brilliant.
sound like a comic we would have come up with for our fantasy draft?
It does, and I'm surprised that I came up with it for our fantasy draft beforehand. This sounds awesome. This sounds unbelievable.
Written by Cullen Bunn with art by Matteo Lally, this series creates a new team of Asgardian heroes to protect the Marvel Universe from intergalactic threats. I don't know what's happened to the Guardians of the Galaxy, but they are apparently off the table for the moment. And the lineup of this team includes Angela. Yes, that Angela of Spawn fame. Valkyrie.
Yes.
Thunderstrike.
God, for fuck's sake.
Throg.
Yes.
The Thor Frog. Scourge.
Yes.
Recently seen in Thor Ragnarok. And the Destroyer, whose pilot remains a mystery.
Yes, I am proud of this. Instant pull for me. Like you said, hard to imagine Marvel creating a new concept that is more for me than like these B and C list and supporting characters getting their own wacky intergalactic team up. I am all over this, man. Cannot wait.
Wacky? You mean whacky?
I do. Whacky. Often whose tool shed they were whacking.
Whacky. Is there any universe where we can get a version of Beavis and Butthead Do America with JR as that character?
Now JR as the FBI agent who's subordinate to Robert Stack's FBI agent, or JR
Stack.
or JR as Mr. Anderson. Yeah.
Either one works, honestly, but Anderson probably works a little bit better. Yeah. Where are you when we need you, cowboy?
Now, Ike, you're fair. You know, I wouldn't mind having you come around, but let's be honest, Ike, you were no Dan Hodge.
Now, you may have been president of the free world, but Cowboy Bill Watts booked the Mid-South Wrestling Territory, the hottest territory in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yes, this is right up my alley, and I'm sure I will have words to say about it down the road.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to an end of the rundown, and that can only mean that it's time. It's time. It's Vader time. It's time for reading and watching.
Reading and watching. What have you been reading and watching?
Both of us have read a little bit this week. I know you've got a lot of Marvel Age reading that you're doing. And me, I've got a lot of taking a long time to read a single issue of a comic book reading. So what you been reading, Nick?
Yeah, I actually read a few books in addition to Marvel Age just because I had some time at home last week. But real quick, the 4 titles I read. Batman 47, which wraps up The Gift, which was a Booster Gold Batman crossover that was, taking place before the impending Batman Catwoman double. Pretty good wrap up to this little time travel, alternate reality type story that certainly puts Booster Gold through the ringer and makes you feel for that guy in a way you probably haven't in a while. So enjoyed that one. Detective Comics 980 and 981 wrap up the Batman Eternal storyline, and with it wraps up the tenure of James Tynion IV on the title. His Detective Comics was a true highlight of the Rebirth era. It is something I am extremely sad to see go, but he wraps it up in a beautiful fashion here, bringing all these characters back to a place that leave them relatively intact for the creator. Not, it's comics. Everything has to come full circle, and he does a beautiful job of doing that here. And then finally, I read The Mighty Thor at the Gates of Valhalla. It's a one-shot that is kind of the bridge between the Mighty Thor and the release of Thor #1 that sees Thor Odinson return as the titular character, or breastular character, if you will. And this one was really good. We got the return of old King Thor's 3 granddaughters who go on a wacky time travel excursion to their favorite wielder of Mjolnir, Jane Foster, and they kind of fangirl out at meeting her, and it's a really cool look at what Jane Foster has meant to the Marvel Universe during her time as Thor, and a little glimpse ahead to what is in store for the Thor mythos going forward. So Jason Aaron continues his masterpiece run on Thor, and I, for one, am looking forward to being with him every step of the way as he continues down that rainbow road.
Now, which weapon do you think is the most devastating? Is it Mjolnir or is it Yarnbjorn?
That's easily Mjolnir.
Well, that's your opinion. Now, quite frankly, I'm not telling you. Don't jump down my ass. I'm not telling you it's one or the other. I am simply posing the question. Some might say the other.
Some might say that. Some might say that. But you have to remember, Mjolnir was forged in the heart of a dying star and forged from the magical Uru metal.
Now, Uru metal.
Yes.
That reminds me of something I used to pull out of Barry Quindle.
God.
Anyway.
No, it was forged in the heart of a dying star, not forged in the heart of a dying chocolate starfish. Completely different, Greg.
Hot dog flavored water. New sponsor of the Ross Report. The Jim Ross Report. Sorry. Damn it. Anyway, all that aside, I read something as well, believe it or not.
Yes.
I read Justice League #1. By
which I haven't even read yet.
Yes. I bought this on a whim when I was picking up my pull list last week, and I decided to buy it off the shelf because I'd heard so much good stuff about this. And it is by Scott Snyder, and Jim Chung is on pencils for this, along with Mark Morales on inks, which I think is Rags Morales, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm.
This was a really good read. I maybe am not quite as high on it as a lot of people are, in terms of I don't think that it's necessarily an all-time great issue or anything, but it's really, really good. And it's the best Justice League issue I've read since Jeff Johns left in 2015, 2016 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So really good start to a new era of Justice League. I really love how Scott Snyder sets up the team here in more of a Justice League Unlimited fashion, where there appears to be a rotating crew of there's the main members, and then you've got your reserves and things of that nature. I love the setup for the new Legion of Doom here, even if I'm a little confused about why Sinestro is wearing his old uniform from pre-Rebirth at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, I'm digging this, man. I think if you're anybody that's a fan of the old Justice League animated series needs to pick up this issue, because it really sets things up in a compelling manner. There's a pretty shocking moment in the issue that stunned me, involving a longtime villain. There's just some really cool stuff that happens along the way. The Legion of Doom looks cool. The Justice League setup is awesome. It looks like Scott Snyder has a great handle on these characters' voices for the most part. And there's a really funny running gag involving the other characters doing their best Batman voice that actually made me laugh out loud at one point. So definitely check out Justice League #1. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it, Nick.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to read it. It's definitely on my list, but I'm actually going to make the attempt to finish Metal and Node before I get to it, so might be a little while from me.
Yeah, understood. So with that out of the way, let's move over to watching.
Mm-hmm.
And we got 2 shows to talk about.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that, yeah.
So let's start it out with our usual CW.
Mm-hmm.
The only show still going on the CW is Supergirl.
Yeah.
However, I've also finished off Black Lightning, so we'll talk about that in a moment as well. Supergirl last week had an episode that, they've had a run of good episodes of Supergirl, really since they came back from their break. And then they had this episode, which had elements that were good.
It was.
I thought the stuff, half good. The stuff that was on Argo City
was
good,
very good. I enjoyed that. I found it actually really intriguing to see the Kryptonian society and how it is today, and how Kara was trying to reintegrate and things were working. Well, that was really good. Everything on Earth was just awful.
Awful. To the point that I think for me it was the worst episode of the entire season. Even with the good stuff there.
I don't know about that. I mean,
because the good stuff that was there was good, but the good stuff that was there was not as good as the bad stuff was bad.
Yeah.
Because I thought the writing on this felt like one of our, actually, I was going to bring this up. One of our listeners on Twitter, if I can pull it up here, one of our listeners on Twitter, Reg Stimpson, at Reg Stimpson, I think is his handle. At Reg Stimpson, says that this episode reminded him of a very special episode of Supergirl. And I think that's a great way of putting it, because it attempts to address the issue of gun violence in perhaps the most ham-fisted way I've ever seen on television.
Yes,
it was so poorly written. It looked like it felt like they wrote this episode in the immediate aftermath of one of these tragic shootings, and the message that they're trying to get across is good, but the manner in which they go about it is so bad that it takes you out of the episode.
Specifically, and I know that I bag on the god-awful James Olsen a lot, but it's hard not to when you have scenes like his and Lena's scene in his office at Catco. Like, that scene where it's like, oh, don't tell me you're a gun supporter, and she's like basically saying to the audience, well, just because we have different viewpoints doesn't mean we can't get along and respect one another's opinions or something stupid like that. Like, just obvious, unsubtle dialogue that the show has committed to the screen in quite some time. It was just atrocious.
To me, it got worse when they confronted the gun manufacturer and I'm there, and that scene was to me even worse. And then they come back and Jean's speech to his people and how they react to it. The whole thing lacked any subtlety at all. And, I felt bad for the actors because they were put into a no-win situation by a lame script. And I thought they did what they could with what they had. But nonetheless, the stuff on Argo City was really good. I am eager to see where that all goes. And was there any development with Jean and his dad in this one?
They revealed that his dad has finally come to peace with the fact that he is dying and is wanting to basically John to help him go through his final days. Some sort of march where they preserve his memories in John, actually, but that will, with it, bring it into his life. So I'm assuming that'll be one of the things that happens in the season finale is the death of Carl Lumbly as John's father.
Yeah, we got to emotionally prepare for that. He's been amazing all season. So with that being said, let's move on to Black Lightning, because I finally watched the season finale of Black Lightning, finished off the entire series to this point, and thought it was excellent. Well, actually, I thought it was really good. The whole series was really good, and there were a couple of hiccups here and there. I talked about the guy playing Gamby, not the best actor in the world. But even he had really good moments the last few episodes, and they kind of made me care about his character a little bit more towards the end. And the lead performance, Tress Williams, is that his name?
Cress Williams,
yeah. His lead performance as Black was exceptional, especially in this last episode. My favorite part of the finale was all of the stuff with him and his dad in flashbacks, both young Black Lightning, and then particularly the scene when he, as an adult, visits with his dad as he's dying, essentially. It's just incredibly emotional stuff. I loved seeing the return of Tobias Hoyle. I also enjoyed the reveal of Lala as the tattooed man, who is a nice nod to the DC Comics world. He's a villain that has popped up in some prominent stories over the years as a foe and a foe of Black Lightning and others. So that was really cool and something that I should have seen coming but didn't. So Tobias Hoyle was great. Not the government operative or whatever, the rogue government operative, not the best character in the world, but overall he was hateable, and he came to a fitting, without spoiling anything, he comes to a fitting end. Just in general, I think the family dynamic was awesome to see. A show that really came out of the gates and surprised the hell out of a lot of people. And I thought it came to a pretty good conclusion. What'd you think?
Yeah, I did as well. I wasn't as high on the rogue FBI agent, I think, as you were. I think the actor was honestly kind of bad and the character was a little thinly written. But hard to complain too much when the rest of what the show gave us was, generally speaking, of such a high quality. And I think it's going to be one of those things where, much like a great first movie, I feel like now you really have the foundation laid for what the show can be going forward. And my expectations for season 2 are quite at this point.
Yes, and they did a really great job, I thought, of setting the stage for what appears to be the conflict of season 2, which is going to be Tobias Whale is now the man questioned in the city. And so how are things going to go from there? So I agree, really good. We also sat down this weekend and we watched the first 2 episodes of Cloak and Dagger on Freeform, which just started. I think both of us, based on the trailer and the footage that had been released prior to this show, had extremely low expectations. Fair to say?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Based on the networking on and the trailers that looked uninteresting and my general apathy towards Cloak and Dagger as characters, yeah, my expectations were virtually non-existent.
Nonetheless, we sat down and caught these on TV. We were just trying to kill some time in the afternoon and came away shockingly impressed by at least I did from this show, Cloak and Dagger. I think I didn't quite know what their deal was. I've never really read them in the comics except in very brief appearances here and there. My primary exposure to these characters was through the Maximum Carnage video game. But nonetheless, I thought the hook was great. I thought the way their powers work was interesting, kind of Hancockian, and the way they activate, and yet it didn't go that route, which I thought it might. So I was really impressed. Good acting from both of the leads, good acting from all the supporting characters, honestly. The kids, the stuff with them as young kids was really good. Particularly the young girl, I thought was very good. I got to say, both these episodes, and I was thinking, well, maybe it'll drop off after the first one, but no, the second episode, if anything, was better first. So, or at least as good as the first. So I don't know, Nick, what did you think about this one?
Yeah, I enjoyed it as, a great deal as well. I was not in the room the entire time the way you were. I was busy doing some other things, but what I saw of the episodes, I was generally impressed by. I think both lead actors did a really good job. The story they're building, it's a little slow at this point, but that's fine. Slow burn is fine, as long as you're not artificially extending the story, which it doesn't feel like they are to this point. So I don't know that I'm necessarily going to go seek out more of it just because of how packed my to watch list already is. But I will say, if you were on the fence about this one, you might want to give it a shot. It impressed me over its first 2 episodes.
Absolutely. Totally agreed. I feel like my queue of comic book shows is never ending because now I need to catch up on Legion. I need to catch up on Krypton, or Krypton, if you will. I need to catch up on Luke Cage, Defenders, Jessica Jones, Punisher, etc. I need to catch up on The Gifted, which I haven't watched. It just feels like it's never going to end. But I shall endeavor to catch up on this one as well and keep hopefully in my queue. But not to be finished yet, I also have watched some more things comic book related. I sat down on Hulu, which recently uploaded a bunch of DC animated movies, and I watched 2 that I missed for the last couple of years. I watched Justice League versus Teen Titans, and then I watched Teen Titans: The Judas Contract. Now, I think I've kind of alluded to it, but we haven't really reviewed any of these modern era DC animated movies about how, I'm not the biggest of this kind of new 52 continuity they're doing in the animated movies. And the animation style they've gone with. But I have to say, I enjoyed both of these. I didn't love them. Particularly Justice League vs. Titans was very uneven. There were things that I loved about it. There were things that I didn't love so much about it. I thought I think they did that classic comic book bait and switch where even though it's called Justice League versus Teen Titans, the actual fighting between the Justice League and Teen Titans takes up maybe 5 minutes of the movie. So I thought that was a little bit of bait and switch, to say the least. And the thing that surprised me about this movie is the Justice League was far less interesting than the Teen Titans were. I thought everybody on the Teen Titans cast did a better job in voice acting. I thought everybody in the Teen Titans cast was written more interestingly. I thought, and it's weird because I generally like this voice cast, Justice League. I'm still not crazy about, I think it's Jason O'Mara as Batman, and the guy that, who is it that does Superman? I can't remember. He's a pretty good actor that does Superman. I've never really bought his voice. But I thought they just pretty much sleepwalked through this entire production. They were kind of not compelling. Even Rosario Dawson, who's usually great as Wonder Woman, wasn't great here. But on the flip side of that, the Titans were freaking perfectly cast. And I think they were mostly unknowns or just professional voice actors, but they were outstanding. Every one of them. Damian, who's been in all these movies, I feel like that actor is getting better and better with each of these movies at portraying Damian, to the point where now I'm hearing it. Now I'm like, okay, I'm buying him as Damian. The Dick Grayson voice actor was great, even though he's only on for a minute. Starfire was great. Beast Boy was amazing. And Javier Reyes, Blue Beetle, is probably the breakout star of these two movies to me. He's outstanding in both of them. And the plot involving Trigon was kind of something that the Titans have seen a million times, but it was pretty well done. Raven was really well cast. So it was solid. I would give it, I'd go 2.5 stars on that bad boy. But I will say that the Teen Titans Judas Contract was, to me, a step above. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was. There are still some things that I didn't like. I cannot get on board with this version that they've gone with. It ties him to the League of Assassins. To me, it misses the point of his character, and it takes away a little bit of that. The thing about Deathstroke, he's always got that code, even though he's a ruthless villain assassin. He's still got a code, if that makes sense, Nick. Mm-hmm. And in these movies, they pretty much completely eliminate that code, where he has no moral compass at all.
I got to be honest. I'm so far behind on this new animated movie shared universe that the odds of me catching are pretty much non-existent at this point. Because that started with what, War?
Yeah, Justice League War.
And I think that's the last one I've seen was Justice League War. In terms of the in continuity ones.
Yeah, well, we'll have to do an off the page on one or two of these. Throne of Atlantis was interesting, pretty good. But yeah, this one, the changes they've made to Deathstroke are not working for me. But the movie itself was great. I thought it was I'm a sucker for it because Dick Grayson is kind of the hero of the day, and I really, even though they had his stupid red costume, and I thought the way they did the Terra plot was really good. And you'll appreciate this, Nick. This is why I bring this up. Kevin Smith appeared himself in the movie.
I actually knew that. I did know that. He talked about that on a podcast at one point, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes, he has a Beast Boy on his podcast, actually, in the movie. So that was good. So otherwise, that's all I got for you, Nick. I thought Teen Titans Judas was quite good.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. The odds of me catching up, like I said, are pretty slim, but maybe one day I'll have something to say on that front.
Sounds good. Well, with that being said, gosh, the ticker is still broken, but I do have some unfortunate information that I got here, Nick, that was actually telegrammed to us today. Would you like to hear it?
Sure, why not?
The telegram reads, "Dear Sirs or Madam, it appears as if," I'm having trouble reading, "it appears as if the, quote, no good end quote, Noam Dar shall be returning soon to WWE 205 Live.
Oh, no.
End of telegram. What do you make of this, Nick?
I don't know what to make of it. I know he's a no-good rat bastard, and I'm not excited about it, but perhaps we will get to see somebody put him in his place, which is beneath a booted heel, preferably that one Ho-Ho Loon, but I know the odds of that are slim to none.
Absolutely. What do we have coming up the folks' way in the coming weeks, Nick?
So next week, we're going to be doing a very special edition of Countdown in honor of Father's Day, where we count the best dads in comics. It'll be a repeat of a column we did way back when, but since nobody read our columns, it'll be all new content to you guys anyway. And we're hoping, Greg, to have a special guest for that episode. Yes, no?
Yes, we will have a special guest, but I shan't be revealing his name because that's PR 101.
PR 101. I got you. I see what you're saying there. Yeah, so that'll be a possibility. And then, of course, we will be wrapping up the month with the aforementioned long book hunt on Devil in Cell B, the first volume of Ed Brubaker's Daredevil run.
Absolutely. And, I can't help but notice, Nick, that, well, under the circumstances, I think we need a little bit more time. I'm putting 2 minutes on the clock.
All right.
And and that means it's time for the Wrestling Minute, but it's going to be the Wrestling 2 minutes tonight. And those 2 minutes begin right now. So, Nick, tell the good folks about our wrestling gathering we had this weekend.
Oh, man, it was outstanding. So, in honor of New Japan Wrestling's Dominion, their big summer pay-per-view event, we had my Greg, Russell Sellers, and Andrew Chandler, Fraser Garner the 17th, all over to my home, where I prepared a variety of smoked foods for them, and we ate very well all weekend. We drank very well all weekend, or at least Russell and Garner and I did, and then we woke at 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern time to watch a wrestling show, and stayed up the entire time, and wound up seeing, for my money anyway, one of the best damn wrestling shows I've ever seen, if not arguably from a strictly in-ring perspective.
Absolutely. We got to see no fewer than 4 great matches on that card, and really every match on the card to me was at the baseline good. And then, the Young Bucks winning the tag team titles in an excellent tag match against Evil and Sonata. We got to see, of course, Will Ospreay and Hiromu Takahashi have a barn burner of a junior heavyweight title match. We got to see one of the greatest of all time, Chris Jericho, reinvent himself yet again and captured the IWGP Intercontinental Championship from Tetsuya Naito in unexpected fashion in another great match. And then we saw Kenny Omega win the IWGP Heavyweight Championship from Kazuchika Okada in what may have been as good a wrestling match as I've ever seen in my life, Nick.
I would agree wholeheartedly with those sentiments. Although I would point out, Greg, that, having Naito lose to Okada at Wrestle Kingdom and then lose to Jericho at Dominion is like if Daniel Bryan had lost to the Authority at WrestleMania 30 and then lost to someone like Shane Douglas at SummerSlam later that year. It's just a travesty.
Wrestling Twitter, folks. And with that, we went a little over time, but you know what? So did Omega and Okada. They went past the hour mark, so we went a little bit past the 2-minute mark. Great weekend, great wrestling all around. So, with that being said, we are going to bid adieu for this week until next week and our special Father's Day edition of the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. I am Greg Phillips. He is Nick Duke. We hope you all have a wonderful week. And in the meantime, send us your feedback. Let us know what we can do better. Let us know what we're doing good. Let us know what you'd like us to do in the future. We will see you a week from now.
Well, Klondike Bill told me that if he ever came across a woman who was extremely clean and well-kept, he would tell her to put on a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt, go take a 2-mile jog, and then come back and see him when she was done.
I believe it was quite sudden and painful.
Hard-Traveling Fanboys, 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 Hard-Traveling Fanboys,